Hey everyone, today I'm super excited to share one of the deadliest chess opening tricks I know, the Tennyson Gambit. It will help you to crush both beginners and advanced players. This setup arises from the Scandinavian defense, but shortly I'll show you how to use it against almost any opening. Instead of the usual move, pawn takes d5, you suddenly sacrifice a pawn by playing knight to f3. Most opponents will capture the pawn without realizing the trap. Then you play knight to g5, preparing to recapture the pawn. Black usually defends, so you push pawn to d3, attacking the pawn a second time. The natural response from black is to take on d3 with the bishop, maintaining their material lead. Now, although black is a pawn up, white has better development. The knight on g5 is annoying, and white's pieces apply pressure. That's why many opponents try pawn to h6, hoping to chase the knight away and enjoy their extra pawn, unaware of what's coming next. But instead of retreating, white suddenly sacrifices the knight on f7. And that's where the game is practically won. Why? Because the knight forks the queen and rook, forcing the king to capture. Then comes the killer move, bishop to g6, a discovered check. It attacks the king and the queen at the same time. White wins the queen, and most commentators would say the game is over here. And it's true. White has a winning advantage with an extra queen, while black's two minor pieces aren't enough compensation. However, there are a few important details. Black may try pawn to e5, setting up bishop to b4 check, and then queen to d8 to save the queen. Gotham Chess once suggested taking the pawn here, but that's actually a mistake. After knight to c6, the queen is trapped, and knight to e7 is coming next to capture it. So after white plays knight to e7, if you get greedy or careless, black can suddenly turn the tables and win the game. That's not how you want to play it. Going back to that position, if you're ever unsure about what to do with your queen, especially when black plays pawn to e5 or knight to c6, which is a very common trap, don't fall for it by trying to capture the pawn. That would be a losing blunder. It's frustrating because many players reach this winning position, only to lose it on the next move. If you're in doubt, simply retreat your queen, even all the way back to d1. Now the queen is safe, and you still have a winning game. Or, if you want to be fancy, play queen to d3 check, force bishop to f5, then queen to g3 check again, keeping the pressure while staying safe. After that, you can simply castle and enjoy your advantage. The Tennyson Gambit can be deadly, if you know these key ideas. Black's first move, pawn to d5, leads to the Scandinavian defense, but it's not the most popular choice. According to stats, it's only the fourth most played reply, with most opponents choosing pawn to e5 or pawn to c5 instead. So what can you do? Start the game with knight to f3. This quietly controls the e5 square, making it harder for black to push there. Most players will go for pawn to d5, expecting a normal queen's gambit after pawn to d4. But instead, you surprise them with pawn to e4, and boom, you're in the Tennyson Gambit. If black plays knight to f6 instead of the usual pawn to d5, you continue with pawn to d3, quietly preparing the central break with e4. When black eventually pushes d5, you play e4 anyway, smoothly transitioning into the Tennyson Gambit. At this point, most opponents will grab the pawn, expecting you to recapture. But instead of taking back, you hit them with knight to g5, setting up a powerful trap. After they take the bait, you calmly develop with bishop to d3, keeping the pressure on. Many players will respond with pawn to h6, trying to kick your knight, but that's a losing move. You respond with knight takes f7, unleashing a devastating attack and seizing control of the game. Now here's the funny part. After you play pawn to d3, even though pawn to d5 is common, the top response from black is actually pawn to g6. You follow up with pawn to e4, then black plays bishop to g7, and you push pawn to e5. The most played reply? Castling, likely pre-moved by players before you even pushed e5. That's wild because now you simply capture the knight for free. And it happens in the most popular line. If black instead moves the knight, then fine. You just continue a normal game with a strong center. Now that you know how to consistently lead your opponent into the Tennyson Gambit, let's also cover some sidelines, so you're not relying on just one trick. For example, instead of capturing the pawn, some experienced players might play bishop to g4, attacking your queen. This line is trickier and requires a different approach from white. When black pins your queen with bishop to g4, many players respond passively with bishop to e2, which lets black keep the extra pawn and get comfortable. But instead, a much stronger move is queen to d2. This not only breaks the pin, but also keeps pressure on the position, allowing you to stay in control. Most opponents at this point will capture your pawn on d3, and you simply recapture with the bishop. Even though the position is slightly different from the main line, most players still respond with pawn to h6, trying to push your knight back. But just like before, this loses immediately to knight takes on f7. If the king captures, you follow up with bishop to g6, a discovered check that also attacks the queen. You win the queen, and in this version, it's even better for you because the knight on f6 is pinned to the rook. Some players might try other ideas like pawn to g6 or bishop to f5, but the same tactic works after g6, and against bishop to f5, you don't exchange. You simply play knight to c3, develop another piece, and keep your attacking chances alive. So even if your opponent tries to avoid the main traps, you can stick to your plan and keep the pressure on. That's the power of the Tennyson Gambit. In this position, you're willingly sacrificing the central pawn, not because you're falling behind, but because you're setting up a powerful move, queen to f3. This single move creates multiple threats at once, targeting weak pawns, eyeing the rook, and even creating potential pressure along the dark squares. It completely shifts the momentum. This move often catches black off guard. Just a moment ago, they felt they had the upper hand, an extra pawn and seemingly stable position, but suddenly they're overwhelmed by tactical threats. Statistically, the most common reaction from black here is a retreat, bishop back to c8, a very passive move that effectively undevelops their own piece. It's quite funny, but understandable. They're trying to avoid disaster. After that, you can calmly recapture your sacrificed pawn. You're still technically down a pawn, but in return, you've gained a huge lead in development and seized the initiative, especially dangerous in fast games like Blitz. From here, most opponents continue passively with moves like pawn to e6 and bishop to e7, just trying to finish their development. Now it's your time to accelerate. Bring out bishop to e3 and get ready to castle queenside. Why queenside? Because it immediately activates your rook on the d-file, placing it opposite black's queen, a setup loaded with tactical potential. With that rook staring down the d-file, every move from black starts to feel uncomfortable. To prevent your discovered attacks, black might try knight to d7 to block the d-file pressure and cover their queen. But here's another sharp idea for you. Play queen to h3. On the surface, it looks like you're just threatening the pawn on h6 and preventing black from castling kingside. But that's not the only idea. If black tries to kick out your knight with pawn to h6, thinking they're finally pushing back, you strike with another stunning sacrifice. Knight takes on e6. When the pawn recaptures, it opens the king's defenses completely. You follow up with queen takes on e6, and now black is in serious trouble. There's no good way to stop the threat of queen to f7 checkmate. The position collapses in just a couple of moves, and what looked like a safe position for black turns into a spectacular loss. This line shows why the Tennyson Gambit is such a powerful weapon. Not only does it catch opponents off guard, but it leads to aggressive, high-tempo play with crushing tactical ideas. Perfect for fast-paced games and especially fun when you love dramatic finishes. Thanks for watching.